Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have a delegate with us, Delegate Ayala. Good to see you.
Good morning, Woody. How are you?
I'm great. I see you have an ERA button on. This is a new era for women in the House of Delegates and in the State Senate. Talk to us about the ERA amendment.
Well, you've probably seen this morning where the P&E committee at 8 o'clock.
Privileges and elections.
There you go, privileges and elections. The committee had and held a hearing on the Equal Rights Amendment, and every year that this bill has been presented in the House or in a committee, it died. It's crossed over. Last year I did a rules change, and for the first time in 42 years of the history of the House, I was able to bring it to the floor for a vote. And we saw legislators, go on record for or not for women. And as my chief patron of this bill, Delegate Foy, so eloquently said, Virginia, she's watching, and so is the nation.
That's great. There's still all these objections, many of them unreasonable, but talk about those. I mean, some people suggest that because the time expired some time ago that it's futile to pass this amendment. What are your feelings on that?
Woody, I've heard this for years. I've been advocating for this for a decade, and they've all been debunked. It's been unhelpful, unprogressive rhetoric that has been spread, untruths. It's been debated, litigated, and now we are going to spell equality out in the Constitution, and it's spelled ERA.
And there's also an objection suggesting that this is going to make it easier for women to exercise their reproductive rights. How do you see that?
I think, again, we've heard the debates and they've been debunked, and we have Roe v. Wade and the First Amendment that have already given us governance over our bodies and our choices. We could pivot to the laws that have been introduced to undo these particular rights that we've been given, and women have always been the target of some of these legislations. We have been treated as second-class citizens in a first-class nation. Passage of the ERA is simply equality. It will codify us in the 14th Amendment, giving us strict scrutiny under the law, so when you're hearing cases of sexual assault, discrimination, there won't be any wavering about women being a protected class. Another analogy could be, think of an airplane. Race, religion, origin are in first class. Gender, sex is in second class. Now we're just moving that up into first class with the rest of the protected classes in the Constitution. And so the 14th Amendment is the only amendment that spells out men. And I just don't think our forefathers really envisioned women serving. As you've seen, we have a historic number of women elected to this body. And a historic number of diverse women elected. Being the first Afro-Latina to serve, I now have a seat at the table. I'm no longer in the menu.
Tell us a little bit about the new leadership. It's taken over 400 years to get to this point in Virginia.
It's sad to say, but I'm so honored to be alive in this time to see progress. And as I said earlier, Virginia, she's spoken, and she's really letting her voice, and her wings spread. The voters talked about equality on the doors when I was knocking this past election cycle, and they were saying there's no need for these old laws that are no longer relevant to current times. So we're just taking strides, call them progressive, call them liberal, call them whatever, but we're just taking strides to bring Virginia up to the current times. And it was time to have a woman speaker, the first African American majority leader, and Latinas, having a seat at the table. And all of our voices can be included in important pieces of legislation and making important decisions for those who we represent and for those who we look like.
And for the first time, you will have women of color who are chairing committees in the House of Delegates and in the State Senate, I believe.
Yes, it's an important day. My background's in cybersecurity. I've worked for Homeland Security for a decade. I got my start working with DoD cybersecurity areas, and this was pre-9/11, and I was one of very few women in a room to create policy in cybersecurity and be a part of that progression in protecting our nation's data, infrastructure, and military operations. So national security was a part of that implementation. So I know what it's like to be some of the first in a room that maybe not was including women's voices. And this year we've seen so much progress in that, again, moving Virginia forward into the current times. And these voices are now going to make some very important decisions and thoughtful decisions and move us forward.
I know there are a lot of cybersecurity issues. We don't want to get into the weeds, but I just want to take advantage of your expertise. I believe you have a bill which calls for a study of cybersecurity issues. What kinds of issues face the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Well, we've seen data, election security, we've seen privacy, we've seen the ways the digital age has grown. It has expanded in the way that we house our information, the way that we use our information, and how it's used. And so it's important that consumers have authority over their personal information. And what it's actually a committee will establish is policy. We'll be able to have thoughtful discussions. It will be able to create policy and move Virginia up to the current times in some of these areas where there's possible lag. And it's exciting because living in the digital age is all I know. Protecting data is how what my career has been built on, and I think it's so important. There's so many things happening, so many bad actors or threats to our data. We need to do everything we can to protect it.
And it takes a while for the law to catch up with technology, if that ever occurs.
Yes.
We've got, you talk about data collection, we've got a new business in the state of Virginia, Amazon. We have others in the state already. They collect data. California just passed a law recently,
yes,
which requires those companies to at least allow consumers some control over their data. Do you see that eventually happening in the Commonwealth?
I think that's going to be part of the discussion. We need to be thoughtful about our personal identifiable information. Years and years ago, my mother would say, protect your social security card and your driver's license, don't flash it. Now it's all online. We pay our bills online, we house our financial payments and credit cards online and do our banking online. We've had to codify the law to make sure that we support these infrastructures and protect information. We're now doing telemedicine. We're doing other transactions that have to do with healthcare online. All information is very powerful information, as we've seen play out in the national stage in a different area, but it's very important to empower people that they know that they have some authority over their identity. We all know that identity threat, no matter what form it takes, can be very catastrophic. And so we should do everything possible to empower our consumers, to empower our businesses, giving them resources. And this is what this committee could do, talk about how we could support not only our business, balance that area, and our consumers.
So we want these businesses to be able to develop new technologies for consumers, but we want to make sure that those developments don't adversely affect privacy.
I think that's part of the process, a thoughtful process. I don't think anybody develops a product with intent, malice intent. I think they said this would be great for, or this will help for. I think that is a way to advocate, but there's also another threat out there that they may not be able to see. And I think Virginia has the expertise, we have the technology, we have the businesses around us to bring this conversation to the forefront, and they also be included in it.
And of course, artificial intelligence is something that's being developed there. There are a lot of issues around that as well, obviously.
I think those are going to be huge discussions for this committee, and even the new Communications, Technology, and Innovation Committee.
And you're vice chair of that committee,
Yes, sir.
are you not?
Yes, we're going to have so much to discuss. Historically, it just has already 34 bills in their docket and growing. This is going to be the first time. Virginia has taken hold of, a committee that was not necessarily looked at, and being the first national security person in the room, cybersecurity person, we were able to have a conversation, make a change, and again, making progress.
Now, the governor gave his State of the Commonwealth address last Wednesday. What are some of the big takeaways from your perspective from that speech?
It's a bold agenda, and I celebrate it. These are things that speak to me, my family, families in the district, and I think that it's time that we, again, move Virginia forward. I know I sound like I'm repeating myself, but why are we staying stagnant when there's so much out there that we can help families? When we're talking about our school systems, teacher pay, when we're talking about equality, paid family leave, these are all good bills that are going to support working families, support our economy, support the growth of it, and I think it's time.
He also talked about some environmental matters, how
Sure.
we have to get off of fossil fuels, for example. How do we do that? We have large utilities that provide us with electricity and gas. They are monopolies. They want to maintain their monopoly status, if you will. They don't want to give away that competitive advantage. How do we deal with those issues?
Well, I'm not in the room as far as, what those discussions look like, but we as legislators are bringing forth pieces of legislation that is going, and the governor is, bringing Reggie into the conversation, where it's the most aggressive piece of legislation in clean energy and renewables that we're going to take part in. And I think this is just the beginning. So I think we'll see this play out throughout the session about these bills and pieces of legislation that we'll talk about clean energy bills, renewables, and making progress, to the governor's point in his speech. And it's time. Things we don't talk about is how it impacts communities and communities of color, and those social, what do they call it, energy injustices. And we need to have climate justice and energy justice in our communities. We pay the price for that, and we need to have a voice in that conversation. And so you'll see even pieces of legislation from myself and many of my fellow Black Caucus members bring forth just amazing pieces of legislation that will bring our economy, talking about clean energy and renewables, forward. I understand the pushback when it comes to, we don't want to dismantle our power, but real people are paying the price. And you just can't play politics and policy when that impacts people.
The other huge issue this year is the necessity to pass the resolution dealing with redistricting reform that passed last year. How do you see that working out?
It's going to be a huge conversation. I voted for it last year. I think it's necessary, but this year we've had time to really take a thorough look at it. There is legitimate concerns, even for communities of color. We have brought forth a voice about some of the things that we have challenges with in that piece of legislation. It will be a discussion. It has not been up for discussion yet, so that yet remains to be seen on how it will be handled in the committee, that it's going to be heard, and also how the conversation will play out on the floor. It's inspiring. We need redistricting reform. We need to make sure that we have fair, drawn lines that are constitutional and fair to every voter. Every voter should have a voice. Legislators should not pick their voters or their office. It should be the voters that choose them.
Now, I take it that some of those concerns relate to minority representation on the 16-person commission number one. And I know there have been some concerns voiced about, well, all it will take are a few people on that commission to sort of upset the apple cart, and the Virginia Supreme Court is the final arbiter.
That's interesting, because the Virginia Supreme Court is Republican appointed, and they did upheld our, they kicked it up to the Supreme Court and said, look, you make the decision, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court said, hey, we're not getting involved in that, and so it was not overturned by the Virginia Supreme Court. But there are real concerns, legitimate concerns about the process and where it ends. If we're talking about community and stakeholders and legislators having this discussion, drawing lines, the question begs, why should not they should have that final authority or decision? I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but this, if there's a tie break, or if there's got to be a process in which you come to some conclusion at the end of the day, and how this will be implemented. I think everyone talking about redistricting wants the constitutionally drawn lines. They want fair representation on all sides. So I think that this is very important, that we have a thorough dialogue about it, our concerns, as well as our other issues that may arise through that platform, and that we'll take a vote on that. I think it's important that we have redistricting reform, and I think that everyone is working very hard in the spirit of inclusiveness and fairness, and hopefully making that possible this year.
Yeah, to your point about establishing some criteria, I take it there will be some legislation to accompany that resolution, which will establish a criteria to determine whether the drawing of those lines is constitutional.
Yes, I think, and that's, as we said earlier, the concerns, and this is how legislation should work. You should have an important discussion about how policy and legislation will impact everyday working families and everyday Virginians. And you have to be thoughtful about that policy.
Tell us a little bit more about the needs of your specific district, especially as that relates to schools, healthcare, and those kinds of issues.
I like to call my district Mini Virginia because it has such a diverse spectrum of geographical layout, as well as, it has so many different types of career choice, individuals that work in several different types of careers. So for instance, we have teachers to technology, DoD scientists, nurses, caretakers, and facilities, and we have churches, we have farm area, agriculture. It's just such a diverse. So all of the issues that you'll see in some shape or form will be part of what my district, or the spirit of my district, will be touched upon. So from renewable energies to schools and empowering teachers and ensuring cybersecurity, we have a lot of those. Career choices, firefighters, EMT, police. We have such a wonderfully made tapestry of constituents, so I'm really honored to serve and support my district again for my second term.
And I know you do have an initiative dealing with STEAM, I believe, science, technology, engineering, arts,
right,
and math. Talk to us about why that's important.
So we have to begin the conversation about empowering our children, preparing them for the future. So it's a grant establishing a STEAM fund and starting to work in those areas, bringing forth activities, or however this grant will be unfolding, maybe, scholarships, maybe it's just empowering our youth to start thinking about STEAM. I didn't think about that when I started my career. I thought I was going to be Oprah Winfrey or a psychologist, right? And I thought that when I was introduced to technology, I wasn't exposed, and so if it wasn't shown to me, my mother used to say, "You can't be what you can't see." And so when somebody introduced this to me, and when my nation had a call for cybersecurity and the empowerment of our, military and defense, that we were needed, I was given a piece of paper and they said, "This is what this does, you got to learn it," and here I am 20 plus years later. Sometimes when you just plant those seeds, you can watch how they grow in such fruitful ways. And we need more of our healthcare professions. We need more mathematicians. We need more, I have a quote in one of my what is it that I put out? My op-ed in the Richmond Times, when we talk about education. LeBron James says, we don't need, and I'm paraphrasing, more LeBron James. We need more scientists, technology persons, healthcare providers, psychologists. And this is what our need is. So hopefully that fund will start those conversations and empower our future.
One of the things that our public schools are doing now at a younger age are teaching kids how to code, for example.
Yes.
I understand that there are other major opportunities through our junior colleges for certificates in cybersecurity. Those are really great opportunities for our youngsters these days.
Absolutely. We have to be creative about empowering our future. We are moving to a more STEAM or STEM platform in our communities. Again, these are jobs that are needing to be filled and are now currently open. I think the governor mentioned between 20 and 40,000 jobs in just technology alone that have been not filled. We have to do everything we can to keep up with empowering our families, and these jobs pay really good. It changed my life, just having an opportunity to work in technology, where I was making one amount and shifted to another. I was able to buy a house. I was able to live in a community where my son could go to school, and it just changed my life. And so that is the goal, is to give every Virginian an opportunity to not only thrive, but empower them.
Now, I believe the statewide unemployment rate is about 2.6%. Does that mirror your district? Is yours better or worse?
So I have not collected the data on the unemployment rate, but I will say this: we do have families that are constantly searching, and if you're working in technology jobs alone, just to go through the clearance process can be 3 to 6 months. So when I ran for office, I quit my job of 20 years, which was the scariest thing: no access to health care, no access to any resources, and I was 1 month away from bankruptcy. Meanwhile, while campaigning in my first election cycle, I was looking for a job and undergoing a clearance. It took 8 months. So it's very plausible that that is an accurate depiction of my community. Again, these processes for clearances or just vetting for jobs, teachers, EMT workers, et cetera, it does delay employment. It doesn't mean that they don't have employment or will not have it, but it does delay employment. So every Virginian needs an opportunity to have access to the American dream.
Now, I take it that a lot of your constituents may work in Northern Virginia or Washington, D.C., so you've got a lot of transportation issues as well with I-95 and I-66. How has Smart Scale worked in your district?
Well, I would say, across Virginia, we had to do studies about what transportation needs were and how monies and funding were going to be applied. We were able to really capture a picture in the 51st District. We are the Beltway Bandits, part of the Beltway Bandits, not of businesses, but of commuters. There are just ways that we need to improve our infrastructure and funding. And so having that insight and wisdom that Smart Scale does offer, and I'm talking about it broadly, gives us an idea of what our needs are as well. And so funding for mass transit, we're still working on that. We're working on our railways. You've seen that in the governor's budget. You've seen that we have to have conversations with our local officials as well about how we can continue to reduce the traffic congestion. Spending your life on the road, and that's every Northern Virginia, nightmare, I should say, 95, 395, 66, 28, all of these roads. It's a quality of life issue. And we need to get families home with their families, being able to partake in life activities, and not spend 2 hours on the road.
Yes, I take it you probably still get some complaints from constituents about the high occupancy toll lanes.
Yes. Yes, there is a conversation about that. 95 has not been as amplified when it first was implemented. Yes, we had that conversation. We have slug lines too, so there's alternate ways to get onto these, easy pass lanes or these high occupancy lanes where you don't have to pay to get on that. And where I live in the 51st District, we have slug lines. It's not a bad word.
No, I understand.
We have slug lines
Yes.
where we pick up commuters. It
Yes.
is the formal and legal way that we've created in Virginia for 20 plus years to hitchhike to work. But it's saved us money, it helps families, and again, we can move up and down the Beltway without spending 2 hours on the road. This does not mean there's not more to do, and that is the only thing that we should look at when assessing our roads.
Had a major influx of supporters and opposers of part of the governor's package dealing with gun safety.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, part of that package is going to clear the Senate in due course.
Yes.
What's going to happen in the House?
Well, the House has several bills. From special session, you'll see those bills being reintroduced. I'm a gun violence survivor. My father was murdered when I was 2. And I know the real impact of families. I know the impact it has on families. And I know that we have to do something. This is a crisis. This is a public safety crisis. And we far too long that our schools are supposed to be safe places to learn and be educated. Our churches where we worship should be safe places. Our community. This is not something that should be part of our burden. We have children doing active shooter exercises in school. This is not something that should be part of our climate or our environment or a discussion, but it is, and that's the reality, and we have to act. And so I think that's what you'll see on the House floor. Universal background check, red flag laws. These are all things. If you've lost a firearm, or if it was stolen, you have to report it. These are responsible things that I think every Virginia can get behind.
Great. 30 seconds left. What will success look like for you at the end of the session?
I just think we'll see a new Virginia, and all the progress that we'll make will be for the well-being, the holistic well-being of Virginians, and that we're here to serve. And I'm just honored to be a part of that.
Great. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here, Delegate Ayala.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.